Hi everyone, and welcome to our second Scratch video. So I just want to tell you guys a recap of what we talked about last week in our previous video. We talked about the basics of Scratch and what it is, a free and visual-based programming language. And I gave you guys a overview of the environment and what the workspace looks like. I even showed you a game that I created called Happy Hop and how that works. So like I've exposed you to the Scratch environment, I will also be exposing you guys now to the different puzzle pieces in the code that can be used in this environment. So let's start off by taking a look at the project that we used last class. If you're unsure how to get here, go back, watch the previous video, and once you're within your project, you can now begin to code. So the first thing we want to do is essentially add a background. Our workspace looks a little bit plain here. This is essentially what you want to keep your eyes focused on. And this is your stage. So we want to add a background to our stage. The way to do this is go into the bottom right corner of your screen and hover over this button that's blue. It looks like this, and you want to hover over it until it says choose a backdrop. So we're just going to click on this, and it brings you to this new place. So it brings you a bunch of different backgrounds that you can use for your project depending on what you want to create. In our case, this is a basic demo, so I'm going to choose a general background, blue sky. So we've added this background and it looks pretty good. But there's one problem. There is a ground in our background and the sprite doesn't seem to be on it. Essentially we want our Scratch sprite to be walking on top of the ground. So how do we do this? Now, whenever you want a new block of code, you need to add the events button. But why do we want a new block of code? Well, we're going to need some code to manipulate the motions of our sprite. Like I said before, the code is what makes your sprite move. So if we want our sprite to move from this position to here every single time, we're going to have to code that. Now let's see, why can't we just drag the sprite over here and have him go? Well, there's no official button that allows us to play, and there's no code yet. So to ensure that our Scratch sprite goes here every single time, we can code it this way. So first things first, like I said, you need an events button. When something happens, your code will be enacted. Without an event taking place, your code will never occur. In this case, we want it to happen whenever we click start, this button, whenever we click go. So is there a similar puzzle piece that allows us to do that? Yes, it's the first one, when the flag is clicked. So we drag this onto our workspace. Is this enough? If we click this, does anything happen? No. But we essentially need another puzzle piece. It means that I want our character to go to a certain position whenever the flag is clicked. So when the Scratch sprite starts off somewhere in the middle of the screen, I want it to always restart back over here. When we later get on to adding more and more motions to our project, you'll see why this is necessary and why we can't just leave the sprite here and click play. Because we want the Scratch to always start off in the same place even after it moves and ends a program. So the first things that we're going to need to add is this block. It says go to blank blank. So these coordinates are automatically the same as the coordinates over here, but this isn't always the case. If I change the position of the Scratch to here, these coordinates will change, and even the ones over here, but not these, because I've already placed them in my workspace and now the work is saved as it is. So now that I've added this piece, I'm going to click play and see what happens. If you look at what just happened, the scratch sprite was automatically moved back to the starting position that we inputted. This position is negative 188, negative 108. Now, if you're not familiar with the coordinate system, this is the x and y coordinates of the scratch sprite. Essentially, it means that it's 188 units to the left and 108 units down from the center, which would be somewhere here. So now that we've got our sprite to finally come back to the ground and be level with the background, what do we want to do next? Well, next we want the sprite to move. How do we do this? So when we want the sprite to move, there's a bunch of different positions or puzzles that we can use. We're going to go to the motions tab, which we're already on, and we see that there's so many different puzzle pieces that we can use. There's move 10 steps, turn somewhat of degrees, turn 15 degrees, go to a random position, go to a specified position, glide to a random position, or glide to a specified position, and so on. There's so many different puzzle pieces that we can use that go all the way down to here. Now, what if we just want the sprite to walk 10 steps? Well, we would say move 10 steps. So we can add this here, but this doesn't necessarily connect with our puzzle. So we're going to have to slide this up, and as you can see, this gray bar appears, signifying that the puzzle fits, and you can just let go for it to snap in place. Now that you've done this, the puzzle has somewhat expanded, and now the sprite character will move 10 steps right after it goes to a specific position, right after this flag is clicked. So let's take a look at this in action. When we click go, I'm just going to move this over here just so you guys can see how the sprite moves. We can click go, it moves to the beginning, and then it's going to move 10 steps. Now it actually did move 10 steps, and it was hard to see because for some reason 10 just is a very low amount. So if we want to see a bigger change, we can change this to 100 steps. We can click play. And boom. So let's take a look at moving this, and let's see one more time what happens specifically. The first thing it's going to do is move to the original position, and then it's going to move 100 steps. All right, so now that we've gone through this process, what if we don't want it to just move? What if we want it to say something to the audience? Well, how do we do that? All of these puzzle pieces over here only allow us to move. How do we have the sprite say something? Well, we can actually go to something called looks. These purple blocks can allow your sprite to say different things for a specified number of seconds. So we can first start off by letting our sprite say, let's say, hello. Now we can add this right to the end and click play. So it was really slow, but actually this sprite moved to the position and immediately moved 100 steps. For us, it was difficult to see because it happened so fast, and then it said hello. But let's take a look at this, moving it back here, and we'll do this one more time. So it says hello, but it keeps saying hello. It never goes away. How do we make sure that it goes away after some time? Well, there's another block that says say hello for 2 seconds. This must mean that it goes away after 2 seconds. So we can click play, right? This should work. And it did. But there's a slight issue. If we're saying hello and then hello again for 2 seconds, what's the point of saying hello in the first place? So we can drag this down, and to delete this piece, we simply drag it on its own and throw it back over there. Now it's gone, and now we can simply connect this piece to the piece above it and start. So it says hello for 2 seconds and then it stops. But what if I want it to go to a position, say hello, and then move 100 steps? Well, I can take this same puzzle piece and hover it over these 2 puzzle blocks. They then move and create space for the first one. I let go, it snaps back into place, and let's take a look at what we've actually done here. Goes to the original position, says hello for 2 seconds, and then walks 100 steps. Well, this is really interesting, but what if I don't want it to say hello for 2 seconds? I want it to say hello for longer. We can change this to 5 seconds. If you hover over any of these text boxes, we can change the content in them. So, if you are unaware of what just happened, I accidentally clicked on this button. Whenever I click this, it automatically starts the program similar to clicking this button. So I can do it again. It goes to the position, it says hello for 5 seconds, and then it moves 100 steps. So now we have somewhat of a more complicated program, and we'll build on this, and eventually it'll become something really complex. But let's stick to the basics for now. Now I want it to say good morning for 5 seconds. So we can change this text, and it can say good morning for 5 seconds. Let's see this happen. So it says good morning, and then it moves 100 steps. So for purposes of time, I'm going to change this back to 2 seconds so that it can occur quicker when we add more things. So now I have it say good morning for 2 seconds, and it's going to be much shorter. Let's take a look at this. It says good morning, and then quickly moves 100 steps. Well, if you look, the movement is a little bit choppy between the character. So let's get rid of this, moving 100 steps, and we can say glide. Gliding is a little bit different than moving a certain number of steps because it accounts for time and position more than it does the amount of distance moved. So we can glide for 3 seconds to a random position. Why not? So now it's going to go to the beginning position that we wanted it to, say good morning for 2 seconds, and glide to a random position. So let's start. And it glides. So it glides for 3 seconds, and it almost goes off the screen, so we can slow this down to 2 seconds to keep this sprite on the screen, and we'll take a look at this again. So it says good morning, and then glides. Now, right now it's going to a random position, but if we want it to stay on the same level, we can use another piece. We can play around with the X and Y coordinates and essentially focus on moving it to a specified position. Again, we want it to glide for 2 seconds, and we want to keep it in level with the vertical placement. We want it to horizontally move, not vertically. So we're going to keep the Y the same, and we can change the X. So we want to keep the Y the same as before, which is negative 108. And then we want to change the X. We can change this to positive 20. So let's see how this actually occurs. Now let's click the flag. It says good morning for 2 seconds, and it glides straight. Now we have somewhat of a working program. Our character moves, our character talks, and our character glides. So this is all I have for you to talk about with you guys for today. I hope you guys were able to pick up on some more Scratch terminology and the basics of it and understand how the different puzzle pieces can affect the movement of the sprite. So there's 3 key takeaways I want us to focus on. The first is that you have to always place puzzle pieces after an event block. Now let's take a look at why. If we move these 3 pieces away from the event block, they're no longer connected. Let's see what happens if we click. Nothing happens anymore because nothing is directly connected to the event block. The event block is always needed for the code to work properly. The second is to adjust the time or length or the specificity of an action. You can simply click in these white text boxes to change what it contains. In this case, we can change the X and Y coordinates. We can change the text and change what the sprite says and for how long. And again, we can change the time or the position. So you can adjust the actions of your sprite based off of the numbers that you input. And lastly, the puzzle pieces always go in order. There is no jumping around. It will always occur from top to bottom. Once one action is completely finished, it will move on to the next. So if you haven't noticed, once it reaches this position, then it will say good morning. Once it has said good morning for 2 seconds, then it will glide. You do not see the sprite gliding and saying good morning at the same time because the glide simply occurs right after the sprite says good morning. And that is exactly everything I have for you guys to learn today. I hope you guys were able to get a good overview of Scratch and essentially how to use it and what you guys can do with it. I hope you guys play around with it and learned a little bit more about how it works. And I'll be back next week to talk to you guys about some more advanced techniques and terms to be used.